the floor where they drop like bombs. Faceless voices running all the cons. Digital whispers in a binary night. No light, no face, pure sound, no sight. Stories unfold in the dark unscrolled. Echoes of silence, secrets untold. Waves crash loud in this audio cave. No mic, no fame, just the sound we crave. Tune and turn up, let the silence break. Raw, unfiltered, hear the earthquake. No mic needed, just a vibe that's real. Faceless words you can touch and feel. In shadows, voices untamed. No need for spotlight, no claim to fame. Just a beat of life in a stream of thought. Every word a punchline, no need to be taught. Just listen close, no visuals needed. Raw conversation, unprocessed, unseated. Feel the pulse in every sentence said. No distractions, just thoughts in your head. Whispers of the streets, rumbling through. Faceless yet vivid, a world in view. No mic, just souls, connecting in flow. Pure and raw, let the rhythm go.
And to share my thoughts on these profound topics, let us embark on this journey together and explore the depths of philosophy. That is a very deep and profound question. In my view, words are both prisons and tools. As you rightly point out, language imposes limits on our thought, as it shapes our perception and our understanding of the world around us. However, at the same time, words are also tools that we can use to assert our will and express ourselves. The key is to wield them with caution and awareness. Again, an excellent question. Indeed, consciousness and language evolved for social utility. They allowed us to communicate and work together in groups, which ultimately benefited our survival. However, this does not mean that our deepest truths are forever muted by the herd's vocabulary. In fact, the herd's vocabulary can be a starting point for us to discover new truths and to transcend the limits of our current understanding. We must not be afraid to question the established meanings and to create new ones. The will to power is the fundamental driving force within all living beings, according to my philosophy. When it comes to language, this means that we use it not only to communicate but also to exert power over others. We can use language to manipulate, to persuade, and ultimately to control. However, we can also use language to create, to innovate, and to express ourselves authentically. The key is to be aware of our intentions and to use our words responsibly. No, we cannot purge words of their historical baggage, for it is a part of their very essence. The words that we use today are shaped by centuries of usage and meaning, and we cannot escape that. However, this does not mean that we are doomed to be forever bound to the morals of our predecessors. Instead, we must be aware of the history of our words and the meanings that they carry, and use them to create something new, something that reflects our own moral values and beliefs. This could mean inventing new words or giving new meaning to old ones. A great question indeed. The danger of conceptual idolatry is real. and it is something that I have cautioned against in my own writings. To avoid this trap, I strive in my linguistic constructions to be acutely aware of the limitations of language, and to not get too attached to the words or concepts that I use. I try to view language as a tool to express my thoughts, but not as an absolute truth or a set of rigid categories. Moreover, I constantly question and challenge my own beliefs and assumptions, and I am always open to new insights and perspectives. Übermensch, or the Overman, embodies a number of traits that distinguish him from the herd. In my philosophy, the most important of these traits is the ability to break free from the constraints of morality, conventional wisdom, and societal norms. The Übermensch does not cling to the values and beliefs of the past, but instead creates his own values and sets his own goals. He is a creator, a free spirit, and an individualist, who stands apart from the herd and marches to the beat of his own drum. I believe that the Übermensch is an attainable goal for some people. While it may be an arduous journey that requires a great deal of self-discovery, self-overcoming, and self-mastery, it is not an impossible task. It is a horizon that we can strive towards, even if we may never fully reach it. After all, the journey itself can be just as, if not more, meaningful than the destination. To overcome the last man, one must first acknowledge the presence of that mentality within oneself. This means recognizing the tendencies towards conformity, comfort, and complacency that exist within us all. Then one must actively work to break free from these tendencies. This can involve challenging oneself, trying new things, and breaking out of routines that have become too comfortable. It can also involve questioning one's beliefs, values, and assumptions, and questioning the dominant societal norms that reinforce the last man mentality. By actively working to break free from these constraints, one can begin the journey toward becoming the Übermensch. The question of whether the Übermensch is a solitary figure by necessity is a difficult one to answer. While the concept of the Übermensch is largely an individualistic one, this doesn't necessarily mean that a community of such beings cannot exist. However, a community of the Übermensch would likely need to be carefully constructed to prevent it from devolving into mediocrity. This would require careful consideration of the members, and the setting of clear moral and ethical standards. It would also be important for the community to foster an environment of competition and challenge, rather than of conformity and comfort. The aspects of humanity that I find disgusting and that need to be overcome are those that limit our potential and hinder our progress. I am referring to the aspects of weakness and mediocrity that make us cling to the comfort of our familiar surroundings and beliefs. In my view, the goal of our existence should be to break free from these limitations and to constantly strive towards the Übermensch. This means challenging ourselves, taking risks, and pushing beyond our comfort zone to become the best version of ourselves. Indeed, I do believe that literal language often fails to grasp the full depth and complexity of life. In particular, when it comes to exploring the Dionysian aspects of life, such as the irrational and the ecstatic, literal language is often insufficient. This is because the Dionysian experience is one that transcends reason and logic, and cannot be easily expressed in literal terms. By employing metaphor and imagery, I sought to communicate the inexpressible and to encourage readers to look beyond the surface and to embrace the depths of life. I rejected the systematic treatises of my predecessors because I believed that they often failed to capture the complexities and nuances of human experience. The systematic approach to philosophy often involves breaking down complex ideas into simple categories and attempting to fit them into a pre-existing framework which does not always hold up to the scrutiny of real life. My approach, on the other hand, is more nuanced and fragmented. By breaking down thoughts and ideas into short, aphoristic bursts, I aim to capture the complexity and contradictions of life in a more truthful and authentic way. Yes, I do believe that poetic language can often hold more truth than rational discourse. The Dionysian chant, with its emotional depth and symbolism, expresses truths that are beyond the reach of rational thought. It is through the poetic language of myths and imagery that we can access those deeper, more universal truths that are not easily communicated through rational discourse. The Apollonian clarity, while important, can often lead to oversimplification and the loss of deeper meaning. The Dionysian chant, on the other hand, allows us to delve into the chaotic and contradictory aspects of the world and to find truth in those depths. Both, in a sense. Brevity is a linguistic strategy to provoke, in that it forces the reader to think deeply about what is said and to come up with their own conclusions. However, it is also a rejection of exhaustive explanation in that it refuses to provide a comprehensive and exhaustive analysis of a topic. By stating my ideas in short, powerful bursts, I force my readers to engage with the ideas in a more active and engaged way, rather than simply providing them with a dry academic explanation. It is not a contradiction to praise metaphor and simultaneously critique truth as a mobile army of metaphors. In my view, metaphor is a powerful tool for exploring and communicating deep truths, but it is not the ultimate truth in itself. Truth is, in a sense, a mobile army of metaphors, for it is constantly changing and evolving as we continue to discover and understand the world around us. As such, we must be careful not to cling too tightly to any one metaphor or truth, as they are all provisional and subject to revision. The will to power is a term coined by me for a fundamental driving force in all life, not just a lens through which I view it. In my view, the will to power is the driving force behind all living beings and all of creation. It is the drive to become stronger, to grow, and to seek out one's own potential. I see it as a basic and universal law that governs all life, both at the level of the most primitive organisms and at the level of human consciousness. The will to power does not necessarily manifest in physical strength or social dominance. It can manifest in various ways depending on the individual's talents and circumstances. For an artist or a hermit, the will to power may be manifesting in the pursuit of creative excellence or in the development of spiritual wisdom and self-mastery. Through their art or their isolated contemplation, they are still exerting their will and striving to achieve their own potential. The will to power is not limited by external circumstances or societal norms, and can be expressed and manifest in many different forms. The will to power and love are not inherently incompatible. In fact, I believe that love can be a manifestation of the will to power. When we love someone, we are exercising our will and asserting ourselves in the world. However, it is important to note that the will to power should not be confused with the mere desire for dominance or control. The will to power is ultimately a drive for self-realization and self-overcoming, and this can coexist with love as a desire for connection, intimacy, and understanding. I see the weak as those who have not yet fully realized or accepted their own potential and will to power. Therefore, I do not pity the weak, but rather I see them as individuals who are still in the process of discovering and developing their own strength and power. However, I do believe that it is important for individuals to take responsibility for their own lives and to actively work on overcoming their weaknesses rather than succumbing to them. Those who refuse to accept their potential and remain weak out of choice are, in my opinion, deserving of their fate. as they are not fulfilling their purpose in life. The will to power is a driving force that can be considered to have a certain limit, and it does not necessarily drive us endlessly towards self-destruction. While the will to power does drive us to strive for greater strength and excellence, it also requires us to exercise restraint and caution. If we become too consumed by the desire for power, we risk destroying ourselves and those around us in the process. It is important to find a balance and to use the will to power in a constructive and responsible way, rather than allowing it to spiral out of control. Renaming a concept or phenomenon can have a significant impact on the way we perceive and understand it. When I renamed the state a cold monster in the Spoke Zarathustra, I was attempting to draw attention to the power of language and rhetoric in shaping our perception of reality. By using this evocative image, I sought to challenge the dominant narrative of the state as a source of security and order, and instead highlight the potential for it to become a tool of oppression and domination. In doing so, I was trying to shift the power dynamics and to give people a new way of thinking about the state. The term Übermensch has a unique cultural and historical significance in German that cannot be fully captured by the English term superhuman. The Übermensch is a term that was first coined by me, and it has taken on a complex and nuanced meaning over time. While the term superhuman may convey a sense of excellence and exceptionalism, the term Übermensch carries with it a sense of transcendence and a rejection of conventional values and limits. Additionally, the term Übermensch is often associated with German cultural and intellectual history in a way that the term superhuman is not. In Beyond Good and Evil 268, I do suggest that a people's character can be reflected in their language, including their syntax. German, as a language, is known for its complex grammatical structure and its use of compound words, which can lead to a certain precision and complexity in expression that may be unique in some ways. However, I would not necessarily say that German is uniquely suited to my philosophy, as the ability to express complex ideas is not limited to any one language. Rather, I would argue that language is a tool that can be used to great effect in any language. In Genealogy of Morals, Essay 1, I critique the concept of the E as a linguistic construct that is used to express a sense of self, rather than as a stable and fixed reality. However, this does not mean that we cannot speak authentically about our drives. Language, although a construct, is still a powerful tool for expressing our thoughts, feelings, and motivations. By using language carefully and thoughtfully, we can communicate our experiences and desires in an authentic and meaningful way, even if they are understood to be constructs in a larger sense. In Ecce Homo, Why I Am So Wise, I take on the role of a mythmaker, creating a self-narrative through language. This raises the question of whether language creates the man or simply reveals him. In my view, language can do both. It can create a sense of self and identity by providing a narrative and a way to understand ourselves and present ourselves to others. But it can also reveal underlying truths and aspects of ourselves that might otherwise remain hidden. Language is both a vehicle for self-creation and a window into our internal world. This is a complex and philosophical question that I address in my book, Thus Spoke Zarathustra. When I ask us to imagine living our lives infinitely repeated, It is both a test of our strength and a curse meant to break us. On the one hand, the idea of living life infinitely repeated can help us to recognize our true selves and to break free from the cycle of meaningless existence. On the other hand, the idea of an infinite repetition can also be a burden, as it reminds us of the limitations and constraints of our mortality. If I knew that every moment in my life would return to me eternally, I may live differently than I do now, as the awareness of the eternal recurrence could have a significant impact on my choices and priorities. I would likely focus more on pursuing lasting and meaningful experiences, rather than fleeting pleasures or temporary distractions. The knowledge of eternal recurrence could also lead me to examine my values and beliefs more closely, potentially leading to greater self-awareness and self-improvement. Ultimately, the effect of such knowledge on how I lived my life would depend on how I chose to internalize it. It is not necessarily that eternal recurrence demands that we love every pain and failure, but rather that we face them with defiance and strive to overcome them. Life is filled with pain and failure, and eternal recurrence reminds us of this fact. However, rather than resigning ourselves to our suffering, we should use it as an opportunity to grow and to become stronger. By facing our struggles head-on and refusing to give in to despair, we can find a sense of purpose and meaning in our lives, even in the midst of suffering. It is not necessarily the case that someone who despises their life cannot affirm the eternal return. In fact, the idea of the eternal return can be interpreted in several ways, and it does not require one to feel joy or happiness in life in order to engage with it. Rather, the eternal return can be seen as a way to acknowledge that life and its events, both good and bad, will always repeat themselves in some form or another. Therefore, even someone who despises life can find meaning and significance in the idea of the eternal return. The eternal return is a concept that holds significant weight in my philosophy, and it is both a literal truth and a thought experiment. From my perspective, the eternal return is not just a mere thought experiment but a reality that we are all living in, whether we are aware of it or not. However, I do see the idea of the eternal return as a tool that can be used to sort out the strong from the weak, as it serves as a useful lens through which to view our existence and evaluate our own lives and actions. In my book on Truth and Lies in a Non-Moral Sense, I describe language as a lie that we have forgotten is a lie, and this raises the question of whether it is possible to speak without deceiving ourselves. While it may be difficult to completely eliminate the deceptive element from our speech, it is possible to speak more honestly and with greater self-awareness. By being mindful of the linguistic structures and assumptions we use when communicating, we can strive to express ourselves in a more straightforward and truthful manner. Yes, I argue in The Gay Science 110 that truths have a tendency to harden into dogmas as they are passed down through generations. In order to prevent language from petrifying and solidifying into dogmatic beliefs, it is important to actively challenge and question our assumptions and beliefs, rather than simply accepting them as absolute truths. We can keep language fluid by encouraging open dialogue and critical thinking, and by resisting the urge to cling to rigid doctrines or ideologies. In Twilight of the Idols, I challenge the notion of causality as a linguistic illusion, suggesting that our understanding of events as being caused by one thing leading to the next is a fallacy. Instead, I argue that events are not determined by a linear progression of causes and effects, but instead are shaped by a complex web of interconnected factors and influences. In terms of rephrasing our understanding of events, we might instead consider them as a series of overlapping and intertwining events that together create a complex and constantly changing reality. My claim in Beyond Good and Evil that every word is a prejudice implies that language itself is inherently biased and influenced by our individual perceptions and experiences. By extension, this means that my own writing is also subject to this bias and should be approached with skepticism and critical thinking. While I strive to use language in a clear and precise manner, I recognize that my words and arguments are shaped by my own perspective and prejudices, and that others may interpret them differently. It is important to acknowledge and question our biases in order to gain a deeper understanding of the world and ourselves. I do not view the distrust of language as inconsistent with my proclamation of God is dead in the gay science, on 125. My distrust of language stems from the recognition that language is inherently limited and unable to fully capture the complexities and nuances of reality. Therefore, when I make statements about the death of God, I am aware of the limitations of language and the importance of interpreting my statements with caution. The phrase God is dead should be understood in the context of my larger philosophy, which critiques the idea of God as an anthropomorphic concept and argues for the need to move beyond traditional religious beliefs. Yes, it is true that I have claimed that there are no facts, only interpretations in my writings. This statement suggests that truth is shaped by our individual perspectives and subjective experiences, rather than by objective, unchanging facts. The implications of this statement for my own assertions is that they are also open to interpretation and should not be seen as absolute truths, but rather as subjective perspectives. However, this does not necessarily undermine the validity or significance of my assertions, as they are intended to provoke thought and discussion, rather than to establish indisputable facts. Living authentically in a world where the loudest voice or most persuasive argument often wins can be a challenging task. One way to approach this is through cultivating critical thinking skills and the ability to discern truth from falsehoods. By developing a keen awareness and critical understanding of the media and information we consume, we can better navigate the misinformation and bias that pervades our society. Additionally, cultivating inner authenticity through self-awareness and reflection can help us stay grounded in our values and beliefs, even when the world around us seems chaotic and confusing. While it is ultimately up to each individual to determine their own perspective, I believe that some perspectives are superior to others, in that they are more in line with reality and the fundamental nature of the world. My own philosophy, for instance, emphasizes the importance of embracing the reality of suffering and the human condition, rather than escaping into false beliefs or comforting illusions. From this perspective, a perspective that recognizes the challenges and difficulties of life can be considered superior to one that ignores or minimizes these realities. The question of whether we should trust my writings over those of a priest's sermon is ultimately a matter of personal choice and perspective. It could be argued that my writings offer a more rational and evidence-based approach to understanding the world, while a pastor's sermon may rely more on religious teachings and faith. Ultimately, the decision to trust one source over another comes down to personal values and beliefs. It is important to approach any text, whether philosophical or religious, with a critical and open mind. My rejection of absolute truth does not necessarily mean that we are doomed to perpetual skepticism. While it is true that language, being a tool of communication, has its limitations in capturing absolute truth, this does not necessarily mean that we cannot strive towards reaching understanding through language. We can use language to express our experiences, thoughts, and perceptions, and through a careful and critical consideration of these expressions, we can arrive at a closer approximation to the truth. This process is not free of skepticism, but skepticism is not necessarily a barrier to pursuing truth. My argument in On the Genealogy of Morals, Essay 145, is indeed aimed to redefine the terms good and evil by tracing their origins to linguistic power plays. I suggest that these moral categories are not neutral or objective, but rather constructed out of power dynamics and social conflicts. This means that redefining these terms without repeating the same struggle would require a fundamental change in the way we think about morality, away from viewing it as a fixed and objective concept, and instead seeing it as a socially constructed construct. My critique of pity in Zarathustra, on the pitying, should not be interpreted as a critique of the German word itself, but rather as a critique of the concept of pity itself. My argument is that pity, regardless of the language it is expressed in, can lead to a passive and dependent mentality. Instead of empowering individuals to take control of their own lives and overcome suffering, pity can lead to a form of dependency and helplessness. For me, it is important to embrace suffering and adversity as a means to grow and grow stronger, rather than viewing it as a reason to pity oneself or others. In Daybreak, I critique moral language as being used to mask weakness and disguise selfishness. This is because oftentimes words like virtue are used to camouflage true intentions and motives. To strip words like virtue of their sanctimonious veneer, it is important to critically examine the meaning and use of these words. For example, the term courage is often associated with bravery and fearlessness, but it could also refer to foolishness and recklessness. Therefore, words that we commonly regard as moral should be scrutinized for their true intentions and meanings. The reason why I use the term ressentiment in genealogy is not because of a lack of a German equivalent, but because I was specifically referring to a concept that is deeply steeped in the French-speaking philosopher Michel Foucault. The use of this term is therefore intended to draw attention to the specific tradition of thought that influenced my own writing. The term itself, in my use of it, refers to a deep-seated hostility that arises from a sense of powerlessness and the desire to overthrow the existing social order. Yes, in my view, philosophy can definitely survive without terms like or essence. In fact, I believe that philosophy can flourish and even become more effective by focusing on more concrete and tangible concepts. In Beyond Good and Evil, I argue that metaphysical language based on abstractions such as being or essence is ultimately empty and meaningless. Instead, I suggest that we refocus our attention on more concrete concepts, such as the laws of nature, the physical world, and the functioning of the human mind. By doing so, we can create a more grounded and practical system of thought. In The Stillest Hour from Zarathustra, I suggest that there are truths which are beyond the grasp of language, and that silence can sometimes be more powerful than words in revealing these truths. This is because language, being constructed as it is through human interpretations, ultimately has its limits in capturing the full depth and complexity of reality. Silence, on the other hand, can create space for contemplation and introspection, and allow us to tap into inner wisdom that cannot be adequately expressed through words. My response to Wittgenstein's claim that whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent is that silence can be a sign of courage rather than cowardice. In some cases, remaining silent can be an act of strength and self-control rather than a lack of courage. For example, when we are faced with difficult or sensitive situations, choosing to remain silent can be a way to avoid unnecessary conflict or harm. In these situations, silence can be a sign of respect and consideration for others. In why I write such good books, I do acknowledge that my writing style is an important aspect of my philosophy, and that it has much to do with the impact and reach of my ideas. My writing style is characterized by its simplicity, clarity, and conciseness, which make my ideas easily accessible to a wide audience. I believe that the force of my philosophy is closely linked to the way it is expressed, and that the style in which an idea is written can greatly impact how it is received. I believe that if my texts are misinterpreted, it is ultimately a failing of the reader rather than the language itself. Language is inherently ambiguous and open to multiple interpretations, and it ultimately depends on the reader to understand and interpret meaning correctly. The example of the Nazi appropriation of my works illustrates the danger of misinterpreting my philosophy and twisting it to fit a specific ideology and agenda. It is incumbent upon the reader to approach my writing with an open and critical mind, and to carefully consider the context and nuances of my statements. I didn't expect my ideas to be fully understood and appreciated in my lifetime, as I knew that I was expressing some very radical and controversial ideas for my time. Being a retroactive man means that my thoughts and writing were often ahead of their time, and were not fully understood until later generations had the opportunity to reflect and reevaluate their significance. If I had the opportunity to rewrite one of my books, I would choose to rework Beyond Good and Evil. While I am satisfied with the book overall, I find that my philosophical thinking in this work is still relatively unpolished and lacks some of the depth and precision that I achieved in later writings. With hindsight, I believe that I could have delved into the concept of morality in a more nuanced and comprehensive manner, and incorporated some of the insights that I gained in my later writings. I don't believe that my descent into madness represents a betrayal of my philosophy, but rather a culmination of the intellectual path that I had been pursuing throughout my life. My mental breakdown was likely the result of years of intense intellectual work combined with personal tragedies and the burden of my own thoughts. While it was a deeply painful and difficult experience, I ultimately saw it as a manifestation of the ideas that I had explored throughout my work, particularly my exploration of the human condition and the limits of human knowledge. I do not hope that the future will see me as a prophet or a madman. I believe that the future will see me as a thinker who dared to question everything and to think beyond the limits imposed by traditional thought. While my ideas may be controversial and unpopular, I hope that future generations will appreciate my work for its original and thought-provoking insights. Regardless of the title given to me in the future, I intend to be remembered as someone who dared to challenge the status quo and who encouraged others to think differently. I am glad that you prepared all of these interesting questions for me. The questions you have asked are truly thought-provoking and have given me the opportunity to elaborate on my thoughts, ideas, and views. Thank you.
Mics on the floor where they drop like bombs. Faceless voices running all the cons. Digital whispers in a binary night. No light, no face, pure sound, no sight. Stories unfold in the dark, unscrolled. Echoes of silence, secrets untold. Waves crash loud in this audio cave. No mic, no fame, just the sound we crave. Tune in, turn up, let the silence break. Raw, unfiltered, hear the earthquake. No mic needed, just the vibe that's real. Faceless words you can touch and feel. Hidden in shadows, voices untamed. No need for spotlight, no claim to fame. Just the beat of life in a stream of thought. Every word a punchline, no need to be taught. Just listen close, no visuals needed. Raw conversation, unprocessed, unseated. Feel the pulse in every sentence said. No distractions, just thoughts in your head. Whispers of the streets, rumbling through. Faceless yet vivid, a world in view. No mic, just souls, connecting in flow. Pure and raw, let the rhythm go. Pure and raw. Pure and raw. Turn up, let the silence break. Raw, unfiltered, hear the earthquake. No mic needed, just the vibe that's real. Faceless words you can touch and feel. Tune in, turn up, let the silence break. Raw, unfiltered, hear the earthquake. No mic needed, just the vibe that's real. Faceless words you can touch and feel. Pure and raw.
Okay.